This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, developing world stocks were slightly bearish today as a fresh plunge in oil prices did sap appetite for riskier assets. While most emerging markets did benefit from weakness in the oil market, the resulting shock to risk appetite did prompt increased capital outflows. Now, as a result, we saw MSCI's index of emerging market stocks rising just about 0.5% on the day, with, of course, gains coming from Asian markets. South Africa's JSE climbed over 1% in line with its European peers, which, of course, responded positively to easing of lockdown measures in some nations. Also, it was spurred on by Tencent, which influences the direction of the JSE, of course, via major shareholder Naspers. Naspers did climb about 0.53% on the day. Now, also coming up on today's show, the United Nations paints a bleak picture for food security in Zimbabwe. UK's Prime Minister returns to work after being hospitalized from COVID-19. And there's been a surge in online purchases amid the coronavirus pandemic in Ghana. Well, let's start off today's show in Zimbabwe. Millions face acute hunger as COVID-19 takes a toll on the country's troubled economy and, of course, food supply. According to a new UN report, more than 4 million rural people, that's about a third of Zimbabwe's population, are in need of urgent action. So far, Zimbabwe has recorded just over 30 coronavirus cases. The pandemic is taking a huge toll on its largely informal economy. A 5-week lockdown that ends next week has also left most urban residents in the nation with no source of income. Well, let's take this apart with UNICEF Zimbabwe's nutrition manager, Mathieu Joyeux. He joins us now via Skype. Great to have you on the show with us. Now, Zimbabwe is really facing a triple threat right now. Food shortages already affecting about 7.7 million people in the country. The economy is in meltdown and, of course, now the impact of the coronavirus. So paint us a picture just as how dire the situation is for the country.
Thanks first for having me on the show. Indeed, the situation is actually very, very serious in Zimbabwe. It's probably one of the worst food and nutrition security crises that the country has been facing for the last decade or so. We've, as you said, 7.7 million people in need of humanitarian assistance because they can't eat well enough and enough meal a day. As UNICEF, of course, we are particularly concerned about children and women that are even more vulnerable to this current crisis. As UNICEF, we target about 1 million children, young children that are in need of nutrition support. And just to give you a bit of a glimpse into what the situation looks like for a child, we have about 9 out of 10 children that can't eat well enough during the day, whether they have to skip lunch, dinner, or breakfast, or they don't have enough diversity or nutritious food that they can access. And this is basically for, I will say, 3 to 4 reasons. The first one is, for the last 5 years, we have had recurrent drought situation. Out of the last 5 years, only 2 years were of good harvest and the others were of poor harvest. That means food prices, food commodities are hardly available for the poorest segment of the population. And that affects particularly young children and women again, as well as adolescents and young people. So you have that situation that is affecting young children and women. And this is because of the drought. It's also because of the economic situation. Zimbabwe is also having a bit of an economic crisis right now with very high inflation, over 500% of inflation on some basic food commodities. So of course, the access of food is also very much compromised. If you remember as well, last year there was a cyclone that affected the Idai cyclone that affected part of Zimbabwe with a lot of losses of assets, goods, and of course crops. So that is also having that protracted effect on people right now. So I have to say that currently UNICEF, together with other development partners and the government, are really working around the clock to really ensure that the COVID-19 consequences of the lockdown and other effects that the COVID-19 is bringing to us is not actually further impacted by the food and nutrition security that is already prevailing.
Now, as you mentioned, Mathieu, the situation was terrible before COVID-19. It's expected to even get more worse after COVID-19. So urgent action is needed right now. So how much aid has the UN been able to provide so far to the country?
Yes, so the United Nations in Zimbabwe have made an appeal, a humanitarian response plan, and an appeal for over $700 million US across all the sectors. Basically, we need food, we need more health services, we need more nutrition services, we need more water and sanitation, access to more water and sanitation, child protection as well, and education. Out of that 700 million, UNICEF specifically needs about 18 million for nutrition, and so far only 19% has been received, which means right now every day is a struggle to try to find the resources to cater for the immediate needs. Purchasing supplies like ready-to-use food for treatment of children that are acutely malnourished, purchasing, of course, food, purchasing equipment, specialized equipment, drugs, medicines, all that is of short supplies. The government is also struggling to have enough resources to purchase all that. So there is really a huge reliance on the United Nations, UNICEF, World Food Programme, and others to really cater for the humanitarian needs. And right now, with all the competing priorities that we see across the world, with COVID-19 taking most of the strength on the resources, we are really struggling with the response right now.
Right. Well, thank you so much for your insights there, Mathieu. That's Mathieu Joyeux. He's the UNICEF Zimbabwe's nutrition manager. Let's shift focus now to Harare itself. Of course, as we mentioned, the pandemic has worsened the food crisis and the economic situation. Let's find out what's going on ground from CGTN's Farai Mwakutuya. He joins us in Harare. Farai, great to have you on the show. Now, you heard the discussion right there. Realistically, how will Zimbabwe be able to access funding to fight the coronavirus outbreak, the food shortages as well, given, of course, that sanctions are in place right now, and that's cut the nation off from aid from multilateral institutions, and, of course, also excluded them from debt relief going forward?
Well, indeed, Uche, it is a tough ask for the government here. They will obviously need to redirect resources and funds that had been budgeted for other areas to put it into this emergency, which means that other plans that had been put in place will have to be on hold for now. We have been told in recent months that by Treasury that they are running a surplus. So those additional funds, those extra funds will come in quite handy now. Also, donations and contributions from the local corporate sector. Zimbabwe launched a domestic appeal for some $2 billion that they're trying to mobilize locally. But obviously with those companies feeling the crunch, feeling the heat from this lockdown, from the coronavirus, it'll be limited in terms of what they can mobilize. So ultimately what is required is some sort of international support from donors, from bilateral partners. In recent days, we've seen more amplified voices, more people making appeals for Zimbabwe to get some sort of relief, for some of these sanctions to be put aside and for Zimbabwe to get the support that it desperately needs. And I think the hope now is that those appeals do not fall on deaf ears, because Zimbabwe desperately needs it at this point in time.
Well, a large part of Zimbabwe's business sector is informal, Farai, and we saw Finance Minister Mthuli Ncube announcing that the state will spend about $24 million on cash transfers to about 1 million vulnerable households in the country. That's about $8 per month per household. Now, is that enough to cushion the impact of the food crisis and coronavirus? What are your thoughts on what the state is doing so far to cushion the impact?
Well, Uche, I think certainly it is not enough, and by the admission of the government officials here, it's not enough, but it will go some way. If I can tell you, just give you an idea of how much that $8 will go, or how far it will or will not go. A bag of maize meal, which is a staple food here in the supermarkets, is going for about $3 US. A 2-liter bottle of cooking oil, you're looking at about $4. A 2 kg packet of sugar, that's $4. That's already beyond the $8 US that is being paid. But the government acknowledges that it's not enough, but says that, given the constraints it's facing, the challenges it's facing, that's the best that it can do at this point in time. But I think an additional challenge, in addition to the financial issues, is the fact that, Zimbabwe, because of the informalization of the economy, there is no accurate database or data bank of these people that require assistance. And so government has struggled to identify these people. And I think that is a bigger challenge as well, that there are many people who will require assistance, who need this assistance, who may not end up getting it because there is no way to identify them, to bring them on board and to be able to get them the assistance that they do require. So it is a double challenge in that respect. Financial resources, which are very strained and very limited, but also a lack of capacity to identify who needs this assistance. Remember, it's not just, the rural community. It is also people in the cities this time around, many informal businesses who are struggling, who are battling, and the challenge now is to first find them and then get them adequate assistance, which may not be forthcoming immediately.
Well, we'll certainly continue to watch this situation there. Many thanks, Farai, for your insights. That's Farai Mwakutuya joining us in Harare. Well, let's move on now to Egypt. The country is witnessing an increase in demand for its agricultural products. COVID-19 has led to numerous restrictions with the North African nation's regular consumers, but new opportunities are now arising. CGTN's Adel El Marhoui with the details.
For years, Egypt has been investing in expanding cultivation areas. The country has been also working to enhance its agricultural products' quality to meet international standards for exportation purposes. This year, these measures have paid off.
At the beginning of the pandemic, we've seen a 10 to 15% drop. Some restrictions have been imposed by importing countries. Some traders thought COVID-19 has stopped shipping. But once that got sorted out, our exports resumed normally. No Egyptian product has been affected.
Since the year began, Egypt has exported 2.35 million tons of fruits and vegetables, with Q1 this year reflecting the same efficiency as in 2019. The prized product this year is orange, which has the lion's share in Egypt's agricultural exports. About 1.2 million tons have been exported.
For years, Egypt has been competing with Spain on the #1 spot in exporting citruses. Egypt is now #1. This year, Spain imported Egyptian oranges, which has created a new challenge for them because our oranges has overshadowed theirs in price and quality.
Potatoes comes next in Egypt's list. It has so far totaled about 550,000 tons in exports. To preserve their quality standard certifications, Egyptian exporters have been already disinfecting all their workers daily. They say the only addition COVID-19 imposed is the face mask. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Now, Moody's has downgraded South Africa's agricultural lender or funder, the Land Bank, to B1 on review for further downgrade. That was on the back of the company's failure to make payments of maturing credit facilities and debt. Moody's believes that this compromises the entity's standalone viability. Here's CGTN's Angelo Coppola reporting.
Despite this, Future Growth, an asset manager and a significant funder historically of the Land Bank, has announced that they will work with the bank to support them through this challenging period.
The Land Bank funds on average around 27% of agricultural debt in South Africa. So what that means is that 27% of the country's food supply, in essence, is reliant on the Land Bank functioning effectively. So actually dispersing loans to commercial and emerging farmers. The Land Bank not functioning correctly could result in food security risks, which could mean that we would need to import more food, and that poses very real risks to food inflation.
The sector has been used for political purposes in the past.
South Africa has historically some industries that have strong, obvious competitive advantages, and agriculture is one of them. And South Africa historically has treated agriculture as a political football. The legacy stretches back over 100 years and more.
There's a history of shareholder interference that has led to a short-term liquidity crisis, which the government must address.
The most immediate priority is a liquidity injection, which will allow the bank to continue lending to emerging and commercial farmers. And the second priority would be a recapitalization and a revisit of the bank's funding structure as well as operational structure.
The bank has three sources of funding: issuing of notes on capital markets, the private issuing of notes, and the banks.
Banks, by their habit, by their nature, have not been long-term funders of state-owned enterprises. So it would be unusual to see banks migrate to become long-term funders of the Land Bank as an SOE. But the issuing of notes and the floating of notes are very viable places to get long-term funding.
The bank is no stranger to management shakeups, governance concerns, and malfeasance.
This time, we aren't unduly concerned about the ethical base of the Land Bank. It appears that the high levels of management turnover and relatively poor board oversight has really precipitated this liquidity crisis. We've done ongoing governance review work of the Land Bank, and at this time, it doesn't appear to be corruption or malfeasance that has precipitated this particular crisis.
It's important that the Land Bank stays in business because we need to ensure that there's food security and there isn't a shortage of any food, which could lead to riots. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Now a look at some other corporate headlines today. Ethiopia is expected to issue new telecom licenses soon. The government wants to offer 2 new licenses and sell part of the state-controlled monopoly, Ethio Telecom, to help liberalize its economy. Now, according to a set of published directives, spectrum permits will be valid for 15 years. Vodacom and MTN are just some of the companies interested in the investment. And Moody's has downgraded its outlook for South Africa's local banking sector, indicating a sharp decline in the economy amid the coronavirus pandemic. The effects of the outbreak are expected to lead to a rise in bad loans for major banks in the country as customers struggle to stay afloat. An HSBC investment company has halted plans to cut 35,000 jobs amid the coronavirus pandemic. The firm had initially announced the cuts in February as part of a massive cost-cutting program. That plan would have saved HSBC an estimated $4.5 billion by 2022. And finally, BP's first quarter profits have declined by 2/3 after the global coronavirus crisis hit demand for oil. The net income for the first 3 months of 2020 was $800 million. That's compared to $2.4 billion a year earlier. The firm has warned that it is facing an exceptional level of uncertainty after a sharp reduction in the need for its products. And that is a look at our corporate headlines. Let's head into a quick break now, still to come on the show. We take a look at how South Africa plans to revive its dwindling economy. And Nigeria takes a beating from the ongoing coronavirus pandemic.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Tunisia-Libya. Hello, Naro.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN. Welcome back. Now, as South Africa continues to grapple with the coronavirus, its leadership is also considering ways to restart the economy. In several wide-ranging speeches at the end of April, President Cyril Ramaphosa outlined his strategy. Angelo Coppola takes up that story.
South Africa has been recognized for taking action swiftly when the virus first appeared in the country, going into national lockdown that saw people confined to their homes and the economy grind to a halt. They've moved quickly again.
Look, gradually we see a reopening of an economy, and that shows that there actually is a plan and there's a map of where things can potentially head in terms of a strategy, which, to be fair to South Africa and also to the leadership, this is something that they need credit for.
The mining sector has already started the process of ramping up their activities. They won't produce more than 50% of their capacity for now.
The phased reopening of the economy is also an opportunity to support South African made products, to buy local, because we've had a significant knock on our economy. There's no question about it. COVID-19 has hurt the economy. It's hurt jobs. It's hurt firms, small businesses, township enterprises, larger companies. They've all been hurt. When we as South Africans go back to the shops and we buy locally made goods, we bring demand back into our economy and we help the economy slowly to recover.
The government says they have consulted widely about how to restart the economy.
We're particularly focusing on primary sectors like agriculture and mining, forestry and so on, because they provide the input into manufacturing and they are the start of most value chains in our economy.
At the same time, the country is concerned about its neighbors.
We're proposing that in level 4, goods that come from elsewhere in the world via a South African port, whether it's Durban Harbour or OR Tambo, and that is intended to go to neighboring countries, can then be re-exported to neighboring countries, even if they're not classified as essential goods in South Africa.
The the country's neighbours and regional markets also provide an opportunity.
We have structures that many of our neighbours don't. And that gives us an advantage which we could use to grow into a regional supplier rather than just the domestic supplier.
As the government grapples with a way to get the economy restarted, it's going to be a learning curve for everyone because there is no textbook about how to do this the right way. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Now in Nigeria, the second oldest airline, Arik Air, is set to implement an 80% pay cut for the month of April. The airline also says it will place 90% of its workforce on compulsory leave without pay from May 1st. Arik Air has suffered a decline of over 98% in revenue streams since suspending all commercial flights due to COVID-19. From Lagos, here's Deji Badmus with that story.
Even before the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, Nigeria's aviation industry was already facing a struggle as domestic carriers battle to break even under a very difficult business environment. The spread of the virus to the country has now more than worsened the situation, placing the industry on some kind of life support. For about a month now, domestic flights have been suspended in Nigeria as authorities impose a lockdown to contain the spread of COVID-19, and the suspension is costing the industry lots of money. The International Air Transport Association, IATA, estimates the cost at around $170 million, plus massive job losses.
The airlines, I'm afraid, will not be able to keep their workers on for a longer period in time because they are not operating, they are not generating any revenue.
Indeed, some of the airlines are already cutting down. Arik Air, one of the biggest commercial airlines in the country, has now placed 90% of its workforce on indefinite leave without pay, while at the same time imposing an 80% pay cut. There are fears other domestic airlines like Air Peace, the country's biggest airline, might follow suit if there was no government bailout.
There must be an intervention fund to resuscitate the industry. So the intervention fund will be there. It should be low interest, long-term intervention fund. On the airline subsector, a facility of about, with an interest rate that is no more than 4% and with about 1% addition for bank charges, no more than 5% when you put the interest rate and bank charges, should be made available on a long-term basis, say about 10 years, with a 2 years moratorium.
For now, the government has not announced any specific bailout for airline operators in the country, but the operators themselves have said beyond any form of bailout, they would want the government to also cut down on multiple taxes and waive some charges altogether.
When the pandemic is over, which we are praying that should happen, it will take about 18 months, 18 to 24 months before operations, before normalcy can return. And so this is the time to place the funds available because we cannot leave, for example, cannot leave the airports just on a standstill.
It's actually not certain when the gates of the domestic airports behind me here would be reopened for business because health authorities are still struggling to contain the spread of COVID-19 across Nigeria. So at the moment, over 120 aircraft are grounded at various airports in the country. So when this is finally over, there's a likelihood that not all of those aircraft would make it back into the sky. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Meanwhile, Tunisia's Transport Ministry says a new shipping line linking the country's port of Sfax to that of Tripoli in Libya is now operational. The shipping link is expected to boost trade between the two nations as well as ease pressure on land transport. With more on this, here's CGTN's Adnan Shaushi.
Tunisia has been keen to increase its trade links with Libya. The Tunisian trade minister says the new maritime lane between the ports of Sfax and Tripoli will help achieve that and lower transport costs too.
The cargo ships from Tunisia to Libya are transporting goods as well as food products to provide Libyans with all they need. We are increasing cooperation between Libyan economic partners in this critical period. Land transport was costly, very long and difficult. This maritime alternative is a strategic choice.
The The minister says Tunisian producers and Libyan consumers should take advantage of the new route, which will also serve humanitarian purposes.
The maritime line has started during the holy month of Ramadan. It's a period of solidarity between Tunisian and Libyan brothers. The ongoing international crisis has brought closer ties between the nations. There's an abundance of agricultural produce in Tunisia that Libyan people need, while local farmers can sell their products.
Following the success of the first 24-hour trip, a second cargo ship carrying 300 containers has left the port of Sfax to the port of Tripoli.
There will be 3 trips per month. The number could rise if more Tunisian exporters are interested in the Libyan market. The port of Sfax has received several requests from companies in many regions across Tunisia to export to the port of Tripoli.
The trade minister says departments in the ministry are willing to assist increased volume of trade with Libya through the port of Sfax after the end of the coronavirus crisis. According to the Tunisian Transport and Logistics Ministry, the volume of trade between Tunisia and Libya has increased since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. The aim of the new line is to ease the pressure on land transport and to secure the flow of goods between the two North African countries. Aden Shawashi, CGTN, Tunis.
Now, the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic is not just sparking a global health crisis, it is also placing the world's labor market in a state of emergency. Tanzania is no exception, as CGTN's Daniel Kijo now reports. Without specific legislation protecting the workers, the East African nation's private sector faces an uncertain future.
April has been a month of uncertainty for Johanna Kiula. He is a teacher at Prestige Schools, one of the hundreds of private schools located in Dar es Salaam. Since the government ordered the closure of schools 2 months ago, more than 120 students are now at home. Parents have not paid school fees for the children since learning had stopped at the institution. As a result, the school cannot afford to keep all 26 members of staff working. Johanna says this has caused extreme mental stress.
My way toward my goals was very clear, but now it is like shaken. I have bills to pay at my home, the rent, electricity, I should pay water.
Tanzania's labor laws are split between private and public sectors. Both offer options like retrenchment, termination, reduced salary, or unpaid leave as options during times of crisis, such as bankruptcy, financial uncertainties, or changes in technology. The management of Prestige Schools has opted to send its staff on unpaid leave. They hope that the situation will change in the near future.
We didn't say that we are giving you unpaid leave forever. It was not like that way. And we told them we are not firing anybody. We are still the same family. But what is happening is that the financial situation is not good.
After this month, the school management says it may look at a reduction in salaries for staff. Going forward, it hopes to pay its workers from revenue generated through online classes. But the school is not alone. Many businesses in the country are going through similar challenges. Both employees and employers in Tanzania are evaluating their rights. Workers want to know what protection they have under labor law, while employers are seeking guidance on how to keep a business going during the COVID-19 crisis. Legal expert Eric Ringo says Tanzania has no legislation that directly addresses employment contracts during pandemics like COVID-19. But he says that any changes to an employment contract must be agreed to by both parties.
If an employer wants to grant to reduce the salary because of the pandemic, then that one must be agreed between the parties.
The pandemic is changing the face of labor in Tanzania as more people are forced to work from home. And just like in many other countries, Tanzania's labor market looks to change, forcing business owners and staff to adjust. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
You are watching Global Business Africa, and coming up after this short break, UK Prime Minister returns to work after being hospitalized from COVID-19. And New Zealand eases COVID-19 restrictions for economic recovery.
No one again began holding guns. Machine guns from police forces toward the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time? Not at all.
What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant.
Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what do you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Now, on the international front, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has returned to work after being hospitalized from COVID-19. Now, Johnson was at one point under intensive care after testing positive for the virus. Following his return, the British Prime Minister addressed the public on concerns of the outbreak. Our correspondent Andrew Wilson was there and brings us this.
This was an important moment for the country, for the government and for this Prime Minister.
Good morning. I'm sorry I've been away from my desk for much longer than I would have liked.
The night before, an unmarked van had whisked Boris Johnson back to Downing Street after a month of illness and recovery. The morning papers reflected two things: excitement at his return and the pressure on the government to move things forward. Business leaders particularly are pushing for more activity, and there are some signs the public is growing restless, issues Mr. Johnson knows he has to tackle.
I know it is tough, and I want to get this economy moving as fast as I can, but I refuse to throw away all the effort and the sacrifice of the British people and to risk a second major outbreak and huge loss of life and the overwhelming of the NHS. And I ask you to contain your impatience, because I believe we are coming now to the end of the first phase of this conflict.
Virus testing for frontline workers, along with shortages of PPE supplies, are two issues which remain a major headache for the government. It's promised progress on both fronts amid continuing negative reports from around the country. The Prime Minister knows his priority is to get the language right and keep the messaging realistic, but also to keep looking forward to a time when the peak has passed and the numbers are coming down.
And in that process, difficult judgments will be made. And we simply cannot spell out now how fast or slow or even when those changes will be made, though clearly the government will be saying much more about this in the coming days. And I want to serve notice now that these decisions will be taken with the maximum possible transparency. And I want to share all our working and our thinking, my thinking, with you, the British people.
His message to the public: hold your nerve. We've got a plan, but we still need more time. Andrew Wilson, CGTN, Oxford, UK.
Now, the COVID-19 pandemic is threatening the coffee harvest in Latin America. The biggest concern is having enough people to work during the season. So what is Colombia doing to make sure the rest of the world has its coffee supply? Well, our correspondent, Michelle Beje, has this story from Bogota.
In Colombia, March through June is one of the most important harvesting seasons for coffee. An estimated 150,000 day laborers travel the country in search of work picking coffee beans. But lockdowns during the pandemic are making it impossible for workers to travel. Colombia's National Federation of Coffee Growers, or FEDECAFE, is asking local residents in coffee-growing regions to fill the void.
We want people that today have no jobs because of the closure of the economy, or to come and help their own communities. So allowing the coffee growers to have somebody to help them with the picking of the coffee, and no need for people from outside to come into the towns to help them in that task.
2/3 of the world's Arabica coffee beans are produced in Colombia, Brazil, and Peru. All of these countries have similar lockdown measures during the coronavirus pandemic. Lower supplies have sent coffee prices surging over the past 2 months. Colombia's Coffee Federation says higher prices are helping Colombian farmers. Medium-sized and large coffee growers who industrialized the coffee picking process are seeing their investments pay off.
People are embracing now the new technologies that we just launched 2 years ago to make more productive the picking of the coffee.
If smaller coffee growers can solve their labor shortages, it will be a good time for all Colombian coffee exporters. But FEDECAFE continues to call on the world's coffee growers to band together.
This is the time where the whole coffee industry must gather together to see how can we solve our challenges and continue the trade of coffee and the growth of coffee consumption around the world.
Michelle Begue, CGTN, Bogota, Colombia.
Now, following a month-long coronavirus lockdown, New Zealand has begun easing COVID-19 restrictions. This will see at least 20% of its workforce returning to their jobs. Now, the rest of the population still needs to stay home for at least 2 more weeks. Our Owen Poland explains from Auckland.
The heart of New Zealand's biggest city, beating again as construction workers clocked back on to major projects like Auckland's $4 billion city rail link. But some are still nervous about COVID-19.
Coming back to work when the virus is still out there and then going home, you're putting your family at risk.
There's no official requirement to wear masks, but many do. The main health guidelines include disinfecting tools and social distancing that will severely limit the number of workers to minimise the risk of new infections.
We are opening up the economy, but we're not opening up people's social lives for the very reason that we need to reduce down our risk as much as possible.
However, children under 14 years of age can now return to school, so their parents can return to work. But playgrounds like this, filmed just 6 weeks ago, are off limits, and some say it's too soon to reopen schools when there's a risk that children can catch and spread the virus.
Why do you say there's too much at stake here? We don't want to see a situation where a new cluster is formed around a childcare centre. That's the last thing we want to see.
The move out of total lockdown from level 4 to the slightly more relaxed level 3 won't actually make much difference to the population because the key message hasn't changed. Stay home and save lives. But people can now move out of their immediate neighbourhood and maybe go to the beach to get some exercise. After being under virtual house arrest for 33 days, people came out onto footpaths, specially widened with road cones to keep everyone safely apart. Some took to the water, others just wanted coffee.
Very happy about the coffee as well.
How long has it been since you've had a takeaway coffee?
A month.
Bacon and egg with mushroom, please.
Fast food was another priority for people tired of home cooking.
You really crave what you can't have, so yeah, it's brought us here.
Some outdoor sports like tennis are now permitted, and golfers were also keen to get on the driving range. But the self-isolation sacrifice is paying off as new infections drop to almost zero.
Today we have 2 new confirmed cases of COVID-19 to report and 1 new probable case.
Hairdressers remain closed, but retailers can sell products for takeout and home delivery. And if the infection rate stays low, restrictions will be relaxed again in mid-May, when bars, cafes and restaurants can reopen, so long as everyone keeps their distance. Owen Poland, CGTN, Auckland.
Now, Chinese State Councillor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi is calling for joint efforts to tackle COVID-19. He made the remarks to 5 of the world's major emerging economies in a video conference. Also known as the BRICS group, member nations include Brazil, Russia, India and South Africa. Our reporter Su Yuting has more.
China's success in tackling COVID-19 has provided a useful experience for the rest of the world and boosted confidence that the virus can be defeated. Wang Yi stressed that fighting COVID-19 is like putting out a fire. Every minute counts when life is at stake.
The global community should never be distracted in its collaborative response by finger-pointing or the blame game. Still less we should allow new tensions and divisions to be created as a result of politicization and stigmatization. China welcomes the appeal by UN Secretary-General Guterres for a global ceasefire. We call on all parties in conflict to lay down their weapons and form the biggest possible synergy in a worldwide united response to COVID-19.
Wang Yi pointed out that China recently donated $20 million to the WHO, followed by another donation of $30 million announced just a few days ago.
Hopefully, most of these funds will be used for addressing the urgent needs of developing countries. We will also provide financial support to the UN's Global Humanitarian Response Plan and do everything within our capacity to lessen the debt burden on African countries and assist them in boosting anti-epidemic capacity.
The 5 countries' foreign ministers agreed they should make full use of the new development bank and the contingent reserve arrangement to provide effective financial support to emerging economies.
Upholding multilateralism, working together to combat the coronavirus, and strengthening BRICS cooperation, those are the key issues that have been discussed by the foreign ministers of the BRICS member states. And the BRICS countries are also looking forward to work together with international and multilateral institutions so that collective global response could be gained to defeat the COVID-19 during this very difficult and turbulent period of time. Su Yuting, CGTN, Beijing.
Now, the collapse in tourism due to COVID-19 is pushing many small and medium-sized businesses in Europe to the brink. Here's CGTN's Tony Waterman with more on how Belgium plans to help the industry.
The historic merchant city of Bruges in the north of Belgium has all the trappings of a medieval fairy tale. It's one of the most popular tourist destinations in the country. So popular, in fact, that just last year there were plans to limit the number of tourists. Now, coronavirus has made those plans obsolete.
There is a total reduction to zero. There are just no more tourists at all.
Lockdown measures in Belgium will start to lift on May 4th, but it's feared it could be months before travel returns to normal, if it returns to normal.
I know for a fact that this health crisis is here to stay.
for a longer time until we cannot find a good treatment or a vaccine. Then I think the measures which proven to be efficient, like social distancing, are going to be respected one way or another. And for transport, this is very important.
Brussels is expected to unveil guidelines around the resumption of travel in mid-May. One option, leave every middle seat on airplanes empty. The idea is not sitting well with European carriers, which are already hemorrhaging billions of dollars as 90% of their flights remain grounded.
You need, on average, a load factor of a passenger aircraft of 72% in order to start making money. So, if you talk about rules like social distancing and so on, obviously, social distancing is not going to be easy.
Airlines for Europe is advocating for the use of masks and disinfectants.
It's estimated that coronavirus will shave more than $400 billion off the global tourism industry. And with Europe being the destination for half of all tourism arrivals, the impact will be profound. Some countries will be worse off than others. In Greece, for example, the tourism industry accounts for about a fifth of the GDP and a quarter of all jobs.
In a video call on Monday, European tourism ministers discussed the possibility of opening tourist corridors between EU member states, perhaps by issuing COVID passports for the healthy. Getting planes off the ground will be key to that. They also discussed ways to support tour operators, which face having to pay hefty refunds. The ministers also called for 25% of the EU's recovery fund, which could exceed $1.5 trillion, to go towards propping up the sector. It's hoped financial support will help the industry weather the fallout from the virus until people are allowed to not only leave their homes, but their countries too. Tony Waterman, CGTN, Brussels.
Well, let's shift focus and take a look at commodity markets now. Oil prices plunged for a second day in a row. Brent crude fell about 4%, hovering around $19 a barrel, but later climbed back up to over $20. Now, markets remain concerned about dwindling global storage capacity, as well as fears that demand may be slow to recover despite countries easing some of those lockdown measures. But traders are saying oil demand is expected to modestly recover from the April lows, but demand will remain under severe pressure in the near term. Gold prices, on the other hand, fell more than 1% today, but recession concerns and a retreat in riskier assets kept the bullion near the $1,700 per ounce level today. Well, let's take a quick break now, still to come. Businesses in Ghana record a surge in online purchases amid the COVID-19 pandemic.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN. See the difference.
Online shopping has gained popularity in Ghana, even as the coronavirus pandemic adversely hits other businesses. The government has started easing some of the restrictions during this lockdown, and non-essential shops have now been allowed to reopen in the capital, Accra. But as CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai reports, many businesses are finding out that COVID-19 has already changed consumer shopping patterns.
When Ghana locked down parts of the country to contain the spread of COVID-19, Stephen Fenoku turned to technology to keep his electronic business afloat, taking orders online.
Because of the lockdown, those who want to have the walk-in couldn't do the walk-in. They only able to sit at home and place the order. And because most of the customers trust us for the rapid way of our delivery services, they were comfortable and we are doing business with them.
Now restrictions have been relaxed, yet Stephen says customers are still avoiding the shop floor and prefer shopping on the internet, and his business has been transformed as a result. Stephen says since he started selling online, he is now able to keep an eye on consumers' buying habits. This allows him to tailor special offers to suit their requirements. And as the number of online orders has increased, so too have jobs for delivery drivers.
During the lockdown, we have helped those people in the house very well, because they cannot come out. They order, then we deliver to them. So it has helped us a lot.
Online shopping is growing in Africa. In total, the value of e-commerce on the continent is expected to reach $29 billion by 2022, according to Statista, an international research firm. But experts say businesses still need to do more to reach customers.
If they can put themselves out there even more and do more advertising, say, hey, this is what we have, we can get this for you just in time, can do this and that for you, then people become more aware.
As the coronavirus pandemic continues, more shoppers will likely choose to shop online rather than in-store in order to avoid close contact with others. Stephen Fenoku hopes that his business will continue to benefit even after the pandemic is over. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
Well, before we close today's show, here's a look at how Africa's currencies performed. South Africa's rand weaker early today, reflecting worries over how the country will fund a $26 billion economic rescue package. Nigeria's naira, on the other hand, continues to hit new lows on the over-the-counter spot and black markets. It's hovering around 450 naira per dollar on the black market. That, of course, is much weaker than the 386 traded at on the spot market. Kenya's shilling losing some ground today due to continued end-month dollar demand from oil importers and manufacturers in the country. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.